They called it manifest destiny, the divine right to conquer. But beneath the flags, muskets, and hymns of expansion, there was another story, one the victors never wrote down. It was the story of the women who were taken, traded, and forgotten. The Native American women who became trophies of war. When settlers pushed westward in the 18th and 19th centuries, the frontier was a battlefield, not only for land, but for the bodies and souls of those who lived on it. Soldiers marched with the blessing of their government, trappers with their rifles, settlers with their hunger for land. Behind every victory, there was loss, and often, that loss was a woman, captured during raids, stolen from burned villages, or sold by rival tribes, desperate to survive. Many native women disappeared into the cracks of a country being born. Some were paraded as spoils, their beauty displayed as proof of domination. Others were forced into marriage, their children born into worlds that denied their mother's blood. Few ever saw their families again. For white soldiers and frontiersmen, possessing a native woman was more than desire, it was power. They saw it as a conquest of both people and land. Taking a woman's body became symbolic of taking her homeland. And so, from the Mississippi to the Pacific, the pattern repeated. Women stripped of their names, their language, their spirits. In some towns, these women were traded for horses, tobacco, or guns. A woman's life could be bought for the same price as a saddle. To their captors, they were property. To their families, they were ghosts. The government called it pacification, but the truth was far from peaceful. In 1864, at Sand Creek, Colorado, U.S. soldiers attacked a Cheyenne and Arapaho village, mostly women and children. Dozens were killed. Their bodies were mutilated. Some soldiers took scalps, others took pieces of clothing, jewelry, and worse. Women's bodies were desecrated as trophies, their suffering turned into souvenirs of victory. One officer even displayed a woman's ass body parts in a saloon as proof of his bravery. This wasn't an isolated horror. Across the frontier, stories whispered of captives who vanished into soldiers' camps, never to return. Of girls, only 12 or 13, taken from wagon trails or reservations. Of women who lived years in captivity, learning to hide their tears, to forget their own names. In rare cases, some adapted, not because they chose to, but because they had to. They learned English, they worked in homes or were married off to settlers who civilized them. But beneath the polite surface, they were still prisoners, forced to smile while their culture burned. And yet, even in silence, they resisted. They carried their traditions in secret songs, in the way they braided their daughters' hair, in the stories they whispered at night when no one was listening. Some escaped and returned to their people, scarred but unbroken. Others became storytellers, healers, mothers of generations who would one day reclaim what was taken. By the late 1800s, as reservations expanded and native populations were crushed under the weight of U.S. policy, the memory of these women faded. They were rarely mentioned in official reports or history books. When they were, it was as curiosities, Indian wives or half-breeds. The human cost of America's expansion was rewritten into legend. The truth buried beneath romantic tales of cowboys and pioneers. But among the tribes, their stories endured, passed through oral tradition, remembered in songs and mourning rituals. The Lakota, the Cheyenne, the Navajo, the Apache, they kept the memory of their stolen daughters alive, because to forget them would mean to accept what was done. Some historians have tried to quantify it, the number of women taken, enslaved, or killed, but records are scarce. Most were erased intentionally. But even a few surviving accounts speak volumes. One Apache woman recalled seeing her sister dragged away by soldiers, never to be seen again. Another was forced to serve as a maid in a military fort for 5 years before managing to escape. These are just fragments of a much larger silence. It wasn't just the soldiers, settlers, fur traders, and even missionaries played their part. The system of violence was cultural, built into the idea that native people were lesser, and that their women were there to be tamed. Paintings, literature, and news of the time often depicted them as exotic prizes, symbols of conquest and civilization. The real women behind those images were suffering in silence. And through it all, America celebrated progress, the railroads, the cities, the gold rushes, while the women who paid for that progress were buried in unmarked ground. Today, their legacy is beginning to resurface. Native communities are demanding justice for missing and murdered Indigenous women, a modern echo of an old wound. The pattern never truly ended. It evolved. From frontier abductions to present-day disappearances, the same story repeats. Women taken, voices silenced, justice denied. History often remembers the conquerors, not the conquered. But, if you listen closely, You can still hear their names carried in the wind that moves through the plains, the rivers, the mountains they once called home. These were not trophies. They were daughters, sisters, mothers, warriors, and their stories, though buried, still demand to be heard. So when we speak of America's expansion, of its destiny, we must remember what that destiny cost. Not just land, not just blood, but the women who were taken, used, and forgotten. The women whose pain was turned into victory. The women who still wait for the world to remember them, because history isn't just what happened, it's what we choose to see and what we choose to forget.